So today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in the month of September. I read 5 books this month and my ratings were all over the place. I did not give out any 1 stars this month, but I did give out 2 stars, but also a 5 star and some 4 stars. So, I mean, good and bad. I think exclusively of those 5 books, I only gave out variations of 2, 4, and 5. So no 1s and 3s, whatever. Let's talk about the books. And we're gonna start with my lowest rated book of the month, and that is, sadly, The Lost Story. All books are magic. An object that can take you to another world without even leaving your room. A story written by a stranger, and yet it seems they wrote it just for you. Loving and hating people made out of ink and paper, not flesh and blood. Yes, books are magic. Maybe even the strongest magic there is. Okay, so we have 3 main characters. The first one is Emily, who her sister has gone missing and she wants to try to find her. So she contacts Jeremy Cox, who is a missing persons investigator. Specifically, he specializes on missing girls. And he has become an investigator specifically because when he was 15 years younger, when he was about 15, I'm pretty sure he's about 30. When he was a teenager, he and his best friend went missing in the woods, and they were gone for 6 months, to the point that they stopped sending out search parties. They stopped looking for them. And when they returned 6 months later, they not only were perfectly healthy, they were actually healthier, stronger, smarter, like could play the piano better, like an anomaly. They were just, they were fine. But the, Rafe, forgot his name for a second, Rafe, which is Jeremy's best friend, he returned without his memories. He doesn't remember where they went. He doesn't remember what they did. He's just completely forgotten everything, but he has a lot of, I want to say instinctual things that have come back with him. That's how I'll put it. Like when we see his room for the first time and we see the kind of decorating that he's done, we can tell that there's something he remembers beneath the surface. And then you have Jeremy, who remembers everything but won't say a word. And their friendship has fractured since they returned, primarily because Jeremy can't say everything, and that causes, that drives a wedge between them. And they don't see each other very much anymore. So when Emily's sister goes missing and she contacts Jeremy, and Jeremy knows exactly where he needs to go to find her sister, but he needs Rafe's help. They can't go get her without Rafe. The 3 then agree to go back into the woods where they were once lost, where the boys were once lost, and try to find her again. This is pitched as a sort of Narnia for adults, so we know there's a doorway of sorts. We know there's going to be another realm. We know there's going to be another world. We know going into the book exactly what it's leading up to. The book does take a long time to actually get to that point. But even with that being true, it was a great start to the story, minus Emily being incredibly annoying. Not because of any sort of habits or anything like that. I just found her too trusting. Like, there were several things that I was like, why don't you ask more questions? Like, your sister's gone missing, and now this guy that you just met, that you've never talked to before this day, tells you, I'm not going to help you. And then you leave, and then he just shows up knowing exactly where you are. And you're like, I didn't tell you where I live. I didn't tell you anything about where I was going. And you're like, oh wait, no, you're a missing persons investigator. You're probably super good at finding people. And she's not just like freaked out at all. And then they go to her house, and she's like, yeah, I lost this thing. I lost this trinket of my mom's. It was really valuable. It tears me up that I lost it. And he's like, he pauses for a second and he just like closes his eyes and thinks real hard or something. And then goes, go check in this spot by your mattress, or like crammed between the wall and the mattress. And she goes inside. He's never been in her house. She goes inside and checks, finds it. And she's like, wow, he's so good at finding things. And I'm like, I just need you to ask more questions. Like, you just have to ask more questions than you do. Anyway, I'm supposed to be talking about the positives at this point. So the beginning of the story, despite that, was very intriguing. I thought that it was written in this sort of mysterious and whimsical way. There's this narrator that pops in between every so many chapters that is clearly telling a fairy, like we already know this is doorway fantasy. And then there's this narrator that pops in and kind of just adds to that feeling of this being a story in and of itself, and giving us little pockets of information, or building up tension and saying just wait until you find out, or filling in gaps if we're going to do some ridiculous time jump randomly. So the narrator I actually really liked because it added that sort of whimsy to the story. I read all the books that I read. We buddy read everything on my Discord, and the narrator had pretty mixed opinions among us. There were some of us that liked the narrator and found it charming, others that ended up being pretty annoyed with the narrator, so, you know, results may vary, but I personally thought that it really added to the charm of the story. And when we first, all the build-up, and it's a long build-up, we know from the start this is doorway fantasy, and it takes us a while to get to the doorway, but I thought the build-up was really well written, and when we first enter the new realm, I thought 2 was really beautifully told. Like, I really liked it. But shortly after we got into the other world, it lost me completely. Like, dropped me, completely gone. Partially because, and I'm gonna be very mild, don't worry, I'm not gonna say too much here, but partially because it felt very chaotic. Like, all of a sudden, after all this slow buildup, all of a sudden it's like, now we need to cram everything into this final chunk of the story. So it just seemed like the pacing turned aggressively fast. It didn't seem like anything was even developing anymore. It was just like boom, 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 we're doing this now, we're doing this now, big reveal, horrible, terrible trauma. Okay, now this awful thing. Okay, crazy stuff going on left and right. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, I just feel like whiplash a little bit. And characters that just met, we're like, oh, you're best friends now? Okay, cool. And the amount of angst, and this is a complaint that I think is valid from page 1 to page, I don't know, like 3 something, however long this book was, is that these characters are all adults. Rafe and Jeremy are near 30, I think, if not already 30. Emily is in her 20s, and they all act like they're 15. Like, the way they talk to each other, the way they respond to each other, the angst they have with one another, they all act like kids. And that I'm fine, except that this is pitched as Narnia for adults, but the whole time I kept having to remind myself that these characters are adults because they act like dumb kids. Dumb, angsty kids. And I found them grating at times. There were times where I was like, oh my goodness, act your age. I think from start to finish, it read like it should have been YA. And I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean that the characters acted like teenagers, not like they were in their 20s and 30s. And so there's that aspect of it. And then there's the aspect of it that once we got to, like, it was a nice, slow, interesting, intriguing build. Then once we got to a certain point, it was like cram, 300 pages worth of story into maybe 100. And it just didn't work for me. It could have been good. That's why it's 2 stars instead of 1. But that last bit of it was a 1 star for me. It lost me completely. Overall, it was a really good idea, and there's a lot that could have made me love it, and it just lost me completely. Next up, we have Cold Days, which is book 14 of Dresden Files, I think. See, that's the tragedy of the human condition. No one wants to be corrupted by power when they set out to get it. They have good, even noble reasons for doing whatever it is they do. They don't want to misuse it. They don't want to abuse it. And they don't want to become vicious monsters. Good people, decent people, set out to take the high road, to pick up power without letting it change them or push them away from their ideals. I'm not going to talk a lot about this book because it's book 14-ish of a series, and because I already have a spoiler-filled review for it. But the series continues to be excellent. I have been reading 1 book per month for the last several months. If you have followed me for any more than a month, then you probably already heard me talk about it, but I love this series, despite it having its distinct flaws and despite it having a more middle-of-the-road start and a few ups and downs. It's consistently amazing at this point in the series, and I will happily just continue reading a book a month for as long as I can anyway. Next book is Finch, which is the 3rd book in the Ambergris trilogy. Forget it, Jake. It's Mushroom Town. So this is book 3 in the Ambergris trilogy. Book 1 is called City of Saints and Madmen. This is the book that had it was a compilation of some that was standard narrative, some that were newspaper clippings, articles, old research papers, half done information. It's a collection of information as well as a narrative for this city, Ambergris. It is an extremely strange story. The first book I had mixed feelings on, but overall I came away wanting more, especially because it's Vandermeer, and even his books that don't fully connect for me, it's still Vandermeer. His writing just still grips me. Book 2, I loved so much. And book 3, I would say is objectively, well, can you say anything is, I would say for the majority of people, book 3 is the strongest of the trilogy. For me though, book 2 was my favorite because each book is extremely unique. Again, this is a narrative as well as a compilation of information. Book 2 is the writings of a missing person's sister as she recounts their life, as well as talking about his life and her perception of him. And then we also have his footnotes after he's come back. He is reading through her papers and commenting on her perception of their life and of what she was observing about him. It's his comments on her observations, and it's this brother-sister writings. And I thought that the way he did it was so unique. I loved getting her perception of reality and then having him come in and kind of recontextualize things. Vandermeer writes weird stuff, but he writes things in a way that is so uniquely Vandermeer, and his literary style constantly intrigues me. And I thought that the story was good in book 2, but just something about the way he chose to write that brother-sister duo, it worked for me. Book 3 is a detective novel. It's more of a noir story, which is just not really my thing, she says, after having talked about how much she's loving Dresden Files. But it's rarely something that works for me. Dresden is very unique in it working for me. And guess what? Vandermeer can do it too. We follow John Finch, who has been assigned an impossible case. And studying this case takes him all over Ambergris. We see a crime lord, we see lots of mushroom people, we see a whole lot of gruesome and terrible things. There's so much that has been established in the first 2 books. While I do think that book 1, at least for me, is the weakest of the trilogy, and after reading book 1, I was happy to continue on because it's Vandermeer, but by any other author I probably wouldn't have continued on with the trilogy, and now I'm glad that I did, because each book, again, I've enjoyed more than the first, but the first 2 books laid a foundation that book 3 just took and ran with. So there's establishing things that have happened in these books, and now in book 3, certain things in this city and in this world have developed a lot, and our characters are having to deal with it. There are certain aspects of the world building that are the kind of, weird fiction that I tend to love, like keeping society alive through fungal enhancements, living fungal guns, mushrooms that grow on corpses, and then whoever eats those mushrooms then gets to see some of the memories of the person that's deceased. Like, so much of this world is around this city that has a lot to do with mushrooms, as the covers would indicate, and how it is a living city that's continuing to grow and evolve and change in the most bizarre and strange ways. But the way Vandermeer writes his bizarre, the way Vandermeer writes his weird fiction, he does it in a way that's like, of course this is how it is. You have to accept it because it makes sense in this world. And I read it and I'm just like, this is so strange, but I mean it, this is what the world is. It's like, it's easy to accept for me for some reason, even though it's so strange, but he likes writing strange fiction that has a lot to do with plant life and with like living ecosystems that kind of become, or living plant life that become a part of the ecosystem and part of the culture. And I just really like it. I can't comment too much on the noir side of things or on the detective side of things because that's the side of things that made this a 4-star instead of a 5-star, because I'm just not super interested in that side of it. And in general, there's certain aspects of this trilogy at large that just don't really appeal to me, even though I think that I'm glad I read the Ambergris trilogy, but it is not my favorite by Vandermeer. But I think a lot of the reasons why it's not my favorite are just things that just don't personally connect with me on the level that Area X connected with me. But I do think that John Finch was a very well-written character and interesting to follow. I think that his fungus-infested partner and the other side characters were all really well-written and a fun time. The characters were well done. The world was fantastic. The way the different styles of story kind of culminated into something that was interconnected was very satisfying. The writing style for book 3 is aggressively different from books 1 and 2. Books 1 and 2 I think are almost flowery. They're beautifully written, very dreamlike in a way, and romanticized, like the especially from the perspective of Duncan, the way he sees the world is indulgent. And I don't say that in a negative way. I say that in a way that just means like he's very fascinated and enamored and taken by things, and that's reflected in the story. And following John Finch, who is a noir detective, and it's more gritty and it's more gruesome. I mean, the whole trilogy can be gruesome, but it's written in more of a clipped, short sort of style that fits the noir story, but doesn't fit the first 2 books. But I think that was intentional. So that took a little bit getting used to, but even though the writing style is significantly different, the world comes together and I feel like it all paid off. I think that anything Vandermeer writes is just impossibly unique, and I appreciate him greatly as an author for that fact alone, but he also just constantly delivers very fascinating stories. So Ambergris is not my favorite trilogy by Vandermeer. That's still Area X, or favorite story by Vandermeer. That's still Area X, Born, and the Strange Bird. Those are still my number 2, even though I didn't finish Dead Astronauts. And then Ambergris would come after that. I am going to read The Hummingbird Salamander, as well as the 4th book in Area X, the Southern Reach trilogy, in October. So more Vandermeer to come, always. Oh, shucks. Okay, next book is Remarkably Bright Creatures, which I was warned, this was a Patreon pick. Every month my patrons pick 2 books for me to read, and this was one of them. And I was warned that this was probably not going to be the book for me. And then when I put it on the TBR and I said, probably not the book for me, people in the comments said, I love that book. You probably won't. And boy, was everybody right. I don't have a quote for you for this book because there was nothing in it that stood out to me, but I will read for you a quote. That's not true that nothing stood out for me. I'm being a bit of a brat. But I will read for you a quote from someone on one of my Discords. For a book called Remarkably Bright Creatures, a lot of the creatures in this book could be really dumb. I just found that one pretty funny. I give this 2.5 stars. I thought it was not bad, but it wasn't mine. So Tova is a recently widowed woman who is financially fine, but wants to continue working to have something to do to keep busy, to give her a way to cope and deal with the grieving. So she's just lost her husband, but she's also lost her son who disappeared at sea. Then we also follow the perspective, shortly, mildly, of a giant octopus. So his name is Marcellus. He is a rescue who considers himself a captive. And so each of his perspective chapters begin with, day 848 of captivity. I don't remember. Probably not that many days. But anyway, we follow his perspective. He's extremely observant. He watches people who are watching him as they come in and out, and makes these very astute observations about them, and also tries to escape out of his tank. So he tries to escape from his tank. He gets out of his tank and he knows exactly what his limits are, how long he can be outside of the tank, 18 minutes. And we watch him through his observations, some of them sarcastic, some of them funny. He's very charming. It's a very charming perspective. And Tova plays a role in his story because she works at the aquarium, and at one point she actually rescues Marcellus when he's been out for too long, and they develop a bond. Our third perspective is Cameron. Cameron has a lot of growing up to do. His mother has abandoned him, and he has grown up with his aunt, and he doesn't know who his father is. And his story revolves around him attempting to find the father that he never knew. He's never been able to hold down a job. He doesn't wipe the chocolate off of his face, or just like generally, he's very immature, needs a lot of growing up. That's his perspective. And he's very, he tries to find his dad. I understand the appeal of this book. I think that the close-knit, small-town vibes were written very well. The town was written and built up really nicely. The focus on loss and grief and family and finding yourself. And there are character arcs. There is progress that happens. And it had a very, very heartwarming conclusion. So there's a lot that I think this book does that makes total sense to me why people love it. I would say that it felt very long for what it was. There were large chunks of the book where I just felt like, why are we still doing that? Why are we still here? And I'll say this, I think Marcellus' intelligence was off the charts sometimes. Octopus are incredibly intelligent creatures, but the ability of deduction, reasoning, and putting things together that Marcellus was capable of was off the charts. And the ability of misunderstanding and slow deduction that came from the humans at times also broke the charts through the floor. I think that the story, the direction that it went in, was very predictable. I think the pacing, what was happening in the story, was not very engaging to me. And I don't know, it just didn't work. Maybe because it's a feel-good story, very bittersweet, very emotional, and plenty of deep themes discussed in it. But it was a very feel-good story, and maybe I just don't like to feel good. Last book in my wrap-up is the best book of the month, and it's Guns of the Dawn. All I ever did was what I had to do, or what someone had to do, and I was closest. This is Pride and Prejudice at wartime. I loved this book. It's a historical, I'm going to say historical fiction. It is historical fantasy, but the fantasy elements are so mild. It feels like a Pride and Prejudice tale told by Tchaikovsky. I mean, like, it was so, it was so good. So we follow Emily and her family, who are a lesser noble family in wartime. Many of the men have been conscripted to war, and the women are at home trying to survive day to day. We have a Lydia character. We have a sister who's very indulgent and very selfish and just wants the men to come home so she can have a suitor. And she just wants to go shopping despite them not having any money. She wants to live in society and do the things that are expected of her, and she can't be inconvenienced with all these things. And Emily is such an admirable character, especially, and I won't talk about all the events that lead us here, but especially as the plot leads to the point of actually starting to conscript women to the war as well. Repeatedly throughout the story, they keep coming back and saying, we're so close to winning this war. We're so close to getting to the end. We just need just a few more soldiers. So we're going to recruit some more, just a few more, and off we go. And it's like, wow, you've said that a couple of times already, but okay, yeah, woohoo. And this sort of what's being said to them doesn't seem to be matching with what's happening, but you still have the characters that are very patriotic and they want to fight for the king and for country and the nobility of this great effort, of this great war effort. And Emily believes in these things, and as they have this, as they have one woman from the household that has to go off to war, it's going to be her. And repeatedly throughout this novel, we see her just doing her best to do what seems right, to do what seems truly honest. So there is a situation where she could put someone else in her stead, and her initial reaction is excitement. Like, I don't have to go off to war. I don't have to do this. I thought I had to, but maybe I don't. And we get these very human moments from her of, you know, being quick to anger or quick to judgment, or excited to put someone else in danger if it means her safety, but correcting herself and stopping herself and saying, no, I would be a hypocrite if I did that, or no, I would be putting this other person in danger when it's my role to be doing this thing. And repeatedly we see these very human moments from her, but we also see her making a choice to do what she believes is the most honorable. And then we also see her having to reckon with exactly what I just said, with the fact that what she has always believed, or what the message is that's coming, as far as like what the war is really like, and no worries, we're totally winning, don't question it at all, realizing that reality may not be quite like that. And when she is actually in the trenches, and when she's in training, when she's in this swamp area that's so vividly described, she realizes like how horrible this whole situation is. The pain and suffering and hardships of war she has to reckon with, because it's right in her face. It's her day to day. She makes relationships with other soldiers, and having to watch them fall and see just how much war costs humans. And also, wartime is done in a really unique way. The perspectives that we have, the way it's addressed and discussed is all really it's done very it's done in a way that's very Tchaikovsky. I mentioned Pride and Prejudice, and that's because there is also a Darcy character. He's not called Darcy, and I won't tell you who he is called, though if you're familiar with Pride and Prejudice, you'll figure it out quite quickly. But one thing that I think what made this book was 5 stars from the beginning to the end. The whole time through, it was a 5-star book. And I think what made it feel that way from the very beginning, even the very slow start before Emily has to go off to war, when we're just doing the day-to-day, what made it so great for me is how well Tchaikovsky understood what makes a Jane Austen novel so good. The day-to-day normal societal life and interrelationship drama that Jane Austen makes so engaging, so charming, so funny, Tchaikovsky understood. And what makes the romance between the slow burn, frustrating back and forth between Darcy and Elizabeth, and the slow build of realizing their affection for one another, and the feats that one will go to for the other, the things that make Pride and Prejudice so special, Tchaikovsky understood. And he did it in his own way. This is Tchaikovsky's book. This is not Pride and Prejudice, but he understood what made Pride and Prejudice what it is, and he was able to do that in his way. And as someone who does not care to read romance, oh, did I love the romance in this book. I think just everything about this book was 5 stars. Just everything about it. The prose was beautiful. The way he would write such simple things in such a beautiful way, in such a unique and different way. The way he wrote the characters, they're all very distinct. Emily is such a beautiful character to follow. I absolutely loved following her perspective, but also commentary on war times and the pain and what it cost is all there. Emily's own grief and past that she has to work through as well, because she also still, she lost her father, and dealing with the repercussions of that, and kind of having to hold a gun in wartime after all that she's carrying with her father as well. The atmosphere, especially in the swamp, the atmosphere and how the ecological situation that she has to navigate through day in and day out was some kind of trudging that we, the readers, had to go through with her. The character arcs, the way it all concluded, I mean, from start to finish, this was a 5-star book for me. I loved following these characters. I loved how familiar it felt to me, yet still such a fresh take on it. This was a fantastic book. There will be a video that is spoiler-filled, more in depth. This is the book that Bryce, Ben, Grace and I are reading together next. We've read a few books together and this is our next read together. I mean, I finished it. I'm pretty sure Ben already finished it as well. So I don't know when we're going to talk about it because not everybody has finished it yet, but I'll have a community post up whenever that time comes, and we will have a spoiler-filled discussion between the 4 of us on this book, and I can't wait to really just dig into why it's so great. But I do highly recommend it. Speaking of buddy read books, also this Friday, Amber, Elise, and I are doing our Opposites Attract book club, and this month we're talking about The Fault in Our Stars, and it'll be on her channel, so do look out for that as well if you're interested. I haven't actually started it yet, but I think it'll be a quick read, so we'll talk about it soon. For the 2 books that I was supposed to read this month and I didn't, the Hummingbird Salamander, which is another Vandermeer book I was supposed to read, didn't get to, and the, what's the book called? Divided Allegiance, which is the sequel to The Sheep Farmer's Daughter. I was supposed to read that sequel this month, didn't. So both of those books are going to move into October. So those are the 5 books that I read this month. Some highs, some lows, but Guns of the Dawn, easily just an extraordinary book. Just could not recommend it more highly to you. Please do chat with me more in the comments if you want to talk about any of these books any further, if you plan on reading any of them or you have read them and you want to give me your thoughts on them. I would love to hear. I'll see you again soon. Bye.